Welcome to the fourth episode of Talk is Biotech. Talk is Biotech is a monthly talk show with some of the most inspiring biotech entrepreneur and thought leaders. So today we are with Robin Röhm, CEO of Apheris AI. In this interview, we will learn more about his journey, his company, and much more. So welcome, Robin.
Thank you so much, Guru. Super excited to be here, and thanks for inviting me to this session. So awesome. Big fan and love to get active.
Awesome. So Robin, why don't we start with a quick introduction, what you do, who you are?
My name is Robin. I'm a CEO and co-founder of a company called Apheris. And what we do is we empower organizations to safely collaborate on data without needing to share the raw data. So meaning while protecting the privacy of that data. The core idea is to offer solutions such that companies can collectively analyze their data. So we are helping pharma companies train drug discovery models, healthcare companies to unlock value of their data in combinations with data from other companies.
That sounds great. So let's take a few steps back and talk about your background. How did you end up here? What is your background? How did you start this company? Do you want to give some highlight about your journey?
Yeah, so a quite diverse background. I studied medicine, philosophy, and mathematics, and looked into entrepreneurship during my studies. So I had my, let's say, first successful solo company during my studies, and then was foolish enough to step into a bank and thought that I find the right way there. Learned a lot. So I was working for the largest Swiss bank, learned a lot, and in particular learned about entrepreneurship when you're thinking bigger. I was serving the successful entrepreneurs of Europe there. And so I mostly learned about the way they think about money, about consumption. And that motivated me because I always felt that there's more to money than what you typically think of when you consume with it. Obviously, as an entrepreneur, you're somehow money driven, and I am money driven, but more in the sense of how can I have impact and how can I, let's say, gain access to capital to change something? And that's a belief and a mindset that I saw, and I thought, okay, that's where I want to dedicate my life as well towards too. So I left the bank mid-2017 with the intention of building a health tech company based on my interests and my background. So we started with a company called LoNova that was developing automatic speech recognitions for children with language disorders. Soon learned that it's, let's say, not a large enough market, so we handed that over to the university. And then I participated at Entrepreneur First and founded a company called Janus Genomics. And Janus Genomics had the idea of building software applications for genomics data. So make it easier for biologists to interact with genomics data. We built a front end and shipped it to pharma and genetics companies. And one of the key feedbacks that we got was that data that we needed for our models was distributed within those companies and couldn't be shared. Because there were Chinese firewalls, regulatory constraints that prevent that. And so me and my current co-founder sat down. I had a background in math and cryptography. He had a background in distributed computation. So we discussed and tried to solve this problem and learned that it's actually a far bigger problem that goes across industries and across use cases. And we failed with that company due to a co-founder breakup. So there were multiple people in that company. And me and my current co-founder founded a new one beginning of 2019, Apheris, with the mission to solve exactly this problem, meaning we want to empower organizations to collaborate on data while keeping the proprietary information private. That was the history to Apheris, and quite successful company so far.
But do you want to talk more about how it works? Let's imagine you're working with a biotech company. What is your role when you participate? How you're helping them access others' data securely? Can you explain the whole process?
Yeah, I can run you through how that works. Imagine a biotech company, and they've invested into computational sciences. So they've analyzed their own data and realized that they only have a very biased view on data because their research was biased. In order to get insights from data out of kind of like the chemical space they already have knowledge in, they need to train their models or to run their analytics on data of other companies, maybe partnering companies. What we would do is we would go to that biotech company and first of all, discuss with them what type of collaboration partners they are thinking of. Typically, these are partnering companies, suppliers, companies that already have business relationships with each other, but both of those companies own intellectual property in their data and they cannot share it. So what we would then do is, first of all, understand how the data is structured. So the relational scheme. So we don't look at the data, but basically, if you think in Excel files, what is the column name and what is written in those columns? And so based on this information, the data scientist of the biotech company can start to construct an analytics request that he's interested to execute, right? That's an analytics request that he wants to perform on data that is not directly accessible. So once he has constructed that, what he does is he sends this analytics request to a Apheris platform, and in particular to what we call the privacy guard. That's a method where we first of all empirically test, is that analytics request, is that safe and secure? And is it privacy preserving? And most likely it's not. And so we extend it with cryptographic and data privacy technologies such that this analytics request becomes privacy preserving by nature. And so what we then do is we send this analytics request to the different data owners and execute that. So we compute in their environment. So we never move the data. We as Apheris as well don't have access to that data, but we run computations that are privacy preserving by construction in the environment of those data owners. And so then when the computation is finished, then the result of the computation is sent back to the data scientist. He can join that into his own analytics. And via these privacy methods, we can guarantee that this data scientist cannot reconstruct underlying data.
Right.
And so that's the workflow through such a, let's say, one-time collaboration. Obviously, if that's set up, you can recurringly run such analytics requests and really start collectively analyzing that data as if it would be your own data.
Got it. So just to make sure I understand it correctly. So you receive a request from, let's say, biotech company. They tell you a little bit about the structure, like how they structured their data. Once you receive their data, you make sure it is, no one can reconstruct it. And then based on that data, you look for the vendors, like suppliers of that data. So do you have existing collaboration with data providers?
We do have collaborations typically where we don't, let's say, state them publicly, but only look at for matching companies based on the needs of our collaborators and partners. But these are, let's say, a mix of academic institutes and as well private companies. And if you think for a data owner, so how can he build a business on top of his data? And that's as well one of the key focuses that we as a company have. It's this, what type of new business models can you actually evolve based on such a scheme? And for a data owner, we see a world where lots of companies own data relevant for pharma companies, for biotech companies, but they're not using it yet. And for them, it's maybe for their core business model, it might not be that valuable, but it's valuable for other third-party companies. Nevertheless, it contains IP. And so they are not willing to give it out because that would just harm their own business model. And so what we offer them is pretty much a solution where a data owner can start to think about commercialization models on top of their data. And those commercialization models can be quite diverse. You can think about just providing controlled access to your data, so recurring monetization. You can think about offering your data in collaborative agreements where you participate in the value creation of your data. That means you benefit if the IP that is generated is high. So these are different models, and that's basically why as well data owners participate in the first place. They really can think about new methodologies to unlock value from data.
This is really powerful because there are many early stage biotech companies. They do their research, but there's no revenue because there's like product cycle is too long. So what they do to diversify their revenue channel is they start offering their CRO services. But what you are saying is they can further diversify their revenue streams by even providing their data without losing any IP or without sharing their secret sauce.
It's really important to understand the value of data when, let's say, multiple complementary data sets are connected. And I can give a very, let's say, hands-on example for that.
Right.
Think, for example, of a company that has genetics data, right? So, or genomics data. Data that obviously sounds valuable, but it becomes really valuable if you have, let's say, a label to that data. So how is that person being treated? So kind of like the patient journey. That's so-called vertically distributed data. So data where about one patient, you have some information at place A and some information at place B. And that's how typically data is fragmented, right? Because a patient goes to the physician, then to the hospital, then to the lab, and so forth. And so if you as a company only can look at your own data sets, if you have, I don't know, 100,000 of genomics data set but with no label, you cannot really do that much with it. A little bit, but not that much. If you start to extend that with information about the patient journey, then suddenly it becomes really valuable. And so our system not just allows those new businesses for a data owner himself, but he can join forces with another party where there's complementary data sets, and thereby really make the combination of those data sets far more valuable. As such, there's new business models as well in those collaborative setups.
So very good point, because you just connect them with complementary data so they can get the most out of their existing data. It is really cool. And do you focus on primary data, or also you work with consultants who are providing you well-structured secondary data as well?
Yeah, so I mean, this is still an early stage company. So let's say we are growing in various directions and still exploring where exactly the biggest value for us as well, and the fastest growth. And I think obviously access to capital as a young company is important. And so you're trying to hit certain metrics and show some proof points. I think you know what I'm talking about, how to balance, let's say, these multiple different interests. And so in the end, what we primarily do at the moment is we take valuable data and as well make it more valuable by feature engineering on the data owner side. So that's a service that we offer. And that makes sense for us because it makes the data more valuable, but that's something that we do in-house at the moment. But let's say from a vision perspective, we believe that there's almost something like a marketplace out there. Marketplace sounds like matching, but that's not what we mean. We believe that there's really underlying technology necessary to build new businesses on top of distributed data sets. And in such a model, obviously, it would not be us that provide the analytics at any given point in time, but we would open up to anyone who needs access to more data and offers an analytics model. And so in that sense, we hope at some point to really boost entrepreneurship again, because companies, or as well, let's say universities that have innovative approaches on how to solve a problem with computations can then search the right access for data and then monetize on that IP. So that's the big vision, but that's nothing we do yet.
That's super interesting. When you were talking about finding vendors like data owners, that's what I thought about, like marketplace element, like connecting people with the right data owners. It can be really powerful because you will basically help industry virtualize further. What I mean by that is someone has idea, but he or she doesn't really necessarily have all the right data points to validate their assumption. They can go to some marketplace, maybe Apheris AI, and find the data, validate their assumption, and then take the next step, raise funding based on that data. That, hey, that was our assumption, we validated that. And then if they have to go to the wet lab and generate more data, they can do that. But I think it will reduce the barrier to entry, especially in the biotech world, because this data is the main asset, like the most important thing in this industry.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So what is your currently product? Is it all manual? So when you receive this request, you make sure the data is not repurposable or not reconstructible. And then you find manually these vendors and send them those files. And or like, how does it work? Or do you have one platform where people are registered and they place their request and it automatically matches them with some owner? So how does it work? How much manual it is, or you already productize it completely?
So let's say the core product, let's say software infrastructure and ability to make analytics requests privacy preserving, that's completely productized. However, the interaction of, when you think about this interaction with a biotech company, for example, obviously they would have to search for the right data and as well understand that and build their analytics request based on that. And so here we are still supporting with our experts as well in constructing the analytics requests to make it fit. And as well, if you, let's say, start thinking about multiple data sets, you have to start thinking about interoperability of data.
Right.
Is it normalized? So there's quite some scientific and research aspect into that, let's say, new defining category that allows you to compute on distributed data sets. If you think about a data scientist today, he has all those tools in place to analyze data that is directly accessible. Now, if you want to not just do model fitting, but really the data science journey, so R&D on data of multiple distributed data sets that is not directly accessible, those tools do not always work automatically. And so we still help here to understand and as well facilitate this interaction between the data scientist with his individual computation or analytics request. And so there's some manual work included. And so that's why we as well focus on certain key use cases where there's typically quite a high value in such analytics requests. So we solve, let's say, or we try to solve unsolved problems from a computational perspective. There's to say, slightly more than a handful of use cases that we focus on. So that's the current status of.
That's great. That's great. And what is proprietary here? Do you have any proprietary technology? Anything unique to your team?
Yeah. So the core, let's say, privacy approach is proprietary, and the core idea here is that it's a combination of an empirical approach, meaning first of all assessing the risk both from a security and a privacy perspective in an automated manner. And the reason why we do that is typically if you use, let's say, cryptographic or data privacy technologies, they have some downside. Either the computational complexity increases or the accuracy of the result decreases. And so you want to find basically the exact right balance between the privacy needs of a data owner and as well the privacy risk of that computational request. And so if you don't measure that upfront and you just apply a generic technology, and there are quite some, let's say, sexy technologies that are currently being used from many different startups, they don't work for, in particular, R&D use cases. They work if the data is super structured and it's millions of data points, but when it comes to research, there's often sparse data. You really have to understand certain portions. So that's why we do some, let's say, effort in measuring this upfront and then preserving exactly depending on the need of this analytics request. And that's a proprietary technology. And then as well for the use cases, currently for one of those use cases that we build upon, and that's covered in NDAs, we as well say build up IP. So that's more on how can you, let's say, apply this technology to solve problems. Yeah.
That's great. Where is AI involved? Is it the way you protect the data? Is it in the matchmaking? Is it to help companies better structure? Like where is that AI or machine learning element?
Yeah, let's say multiple stages throughout the process. The first one, typically it's AI models that are being trained upon the platform. So, and typically as well as we, let's say, operate in pharma and healthcare, quite complex AI models, right? So typically deep learning models where people get active on, and we have as well built, let's say, those first components for deep learning models to assess the risk of such analytics requests. So that's the first part. And then in measuring and automatically testing what, let's say, privacy and security and needs such a process have, there's as well classical machine learning involved. So in our kind of like proprietary privacy techniques. So these are the, let's say, two main stages. And then the rest is basically security engineering, right? You want to make sure that at no point in time, any person that don't has the rights can access any of that information. So that's currently a cloud native solution where there's classical, complicated, but not complex. That's
that sounds pretty cool. Pretty cool. Do you have any IP on your model approach, any processes?
You mean in terms of patents?
Yeah.
So we don't have any patents. We're looking into that, but I think there's as well, my co-founder could say a lot more to that. Let's say software patents is obviously a complex thing in Europe. In the US, it's different. So we haven't looked at patents, let's say, that closely on the process side yet. And I think the core difficulty that a company like ours has to solve is really more on the incentivizing different parties to actually collaborate. So it's almost defensibility on the side. And so sometimes people say we have the sales monster because we sell multiple different sides. You need a data consumer, you need a data owner, and these are large enterprises often. And so you have to understand their processes, multiple stakeholders. So that's quite a complex undertaking. And we think so we are not that, let's say, fearful from people who try to copy that. Rather, we are very much focused on solving it ourselves. And so that's the far bigger challenge, I would say.
Yeah, I completely understand. And your customers are like big pharma, biotech, or hospitals. Where's your sweet spot? Because I can see the value in all different places, right? Because everyone is generating data, especially in the biological world or IP sensitive industries. Everyone has generated data and they do have additional support needs. Or I can also see the impact in AI companies. So AI companies are creating their own models, enabling, let's say, in silico target identification, or you name it, supporting early stages of drug discovery. So where is your sweet spot? Like, have you identified any sweet spot just yet, or you're still testing the waters?
So, I mean, we are, let's say, still testing the waters, but have nevertheless identified some sweet spots. But we haven't tested everything. So the ability to generate value for us in different combinations, there's still some exploratory work here. But what we currently mostly have is large pharma companies, large biotechs as customers, so companies that have already invested heavily into computational approaches and now are looking to boost their own AI analytics capabilities. So these are typically the customers. Now, what we're currently doing is making the data owners more towards our point of focus. So in an older Apheris world, we would go to the large pharma and biotechs, ask them what type of data they would want to access, and then they would pay us for our services around, would license our software and then pay us for services for making that possible. Now, what we understand is basically that the biggest value potential that we can create is really on the data owner side. If those if such data is not used yet, is not commercialized yet. And so what we're currently doing is shifting this focus and making the data owner as a customer and partner. So basically what we're offering is to help data owners commercialize the data, find data partnerships, generate new revenue. And we think about different, let's say, business models there, starting from we get a share of the value that is being generated up until we can as well participate in collaborative setups that they enter, and then as well have some of the value being generated, connected to us.
I really find your supply side empowering these smaller companies to really commercialize data and support their companies. It's really exciting because there are, like, even if you see the CRO world, contract research organization, there are tens of thousands of CROs now, and many of them are small. And many of them have hybrid business models. They have their own drug candidates. They provide research services on top of that. They provide consulting service. Now you're adding additional layer for revenue generation. It's like taking advantage of their data. It's very unique and novel approach, and I can see the huge impact of that because all the companies or all the labs, they are generating data, but the main challenge is they don't want to lose their IP, and they don't just want to give it away for one-time transaction. But if you can have innovative business model, like help them either give access to their data, let's say once a year or once a month in like subscription or licensing based model, I think this is really unique and novel.
And it goes as well, when I look at why we founded this company and as well the philosophy that we had with it, we really saw that basically there are, let's say, some large tech companies that have managed to build out monopolies via building out data sets, right? Obviously,
right.
The large tech companies have the best AI talents often, but that is not their competitive advantage. It's this proprietary access to data that leverages their AI talent. And so when we founded this, we really had this idea of breaking such systems apart and allowing smaller data owners to as well collectively build virtual large data sets that then generate equal value. And so in that sense, that's why we are as well glad to shift again to data owners. We have made this step of focusing on the data consumer beforehand because we didn't know how to build out our product. We didn't know how would a data consumer use third-party data? How is that interaction? And so that's why we, let's say, took that shift. And now that we understand that better, we more carefully look at the other side. And I think in the end, it's just allowing a new type of value exchange between different companies. That's one of the key focus areas.
That's awesome. So if you have to imagine the promised land, let's say that's a complete data collaborative world, biotech companies are collaborating with their data, with pharma companies, with even hospitals to access the patient data. What impact do you think it can make in the ideal world powered by Apheris AI? What is your ideal state you are aiming to achieve?
I think access to data is the next big revolution. When we think about the last time research and, let's say, computations have accelerated was because there was more compute, right? More GPU accessible. And that just allowed us to think about to initiate, let's say, those initial large successes of artificial intelligence. And I think what we see is that currently access to high quality data is the biggest impediment. And so, what we believe is that this will drive R&D breakthroughs across industries. We are currently focused primarily on the, let's say, healthcare and biotech industry. I can't even think about what type of R&D breakthroughs, because I think each of those fields are typically very specified fields where value generation is so high that you can build multiple companies to solve one disease or one problem, to identify a certain mechanisms. The next revolution will be on understanding more of that, as well creating building blocks such that you can work with biology. We basically want to build the information infrastructure on top of that. I can't even imagine what if that will become reality, what type of R&D breakthroughs will be empowered. And it's far off from that we are included in all of that, right? We want to build the engine and not the every breakthrough that will happen based on that.
Yeah, it's always like that. You create the platform and let people innovate on top of that. Yeah. So I think what you're saying is you are creating this new norm, new system, and allowing people to access data or to commercialize their data. And then they will innovate on top of that automatically, eventually. So that's pretty cool. So if I have a biotech company, let's say I'm creating a drug for, I don't know, Alzheimer's disease, and I want to reduce my cost to run my POC. Do you think Apheris AI or similar companies can help me reduce my cost to enter the market, and how?
Yeah, we can definitely help. So basically what you would do is identify data partners that sit on data that is relevant for your research. Maybe already we have, let's say, partners in our given data ecosystem. Often those are as well academic partners that nevertheless can't or don't want to share their data because it's IP. Right. Basically, on top of our core infrastructure and solution, you could build out your insights and verify and, let's say, come up with quicker, with better hypotheses, such that you can need to synthesize less compounds and have a high probability of actually, let's say, finding successful compounds. So that's pretty much, we are the platform on top of which you can generate faster, better hypotheses.
That's pretty cool. And currently your customers use your service primarily to reduce the number of wet lab experiments, or to make their research more reproducible, or to make their research more efficient and run automation, because if they don't have quality data, they cannot really automate processes. So what is the biggest incentive for your current customer?
Yes, sometimes we don't know what exactly our customers use it for. So sometimes it's more of that request of we want to optimize, build a model that generalizes better, and we don't even know exactly where they're using it. So as such, we are feeding into pipelines that they have and only learning over time for which exact cause this is being used. Obviously, we can make assumptions over time, but sometimes as well, companies are quite secretive for what exactly they need let's say, those new insights for. And for, let's say, smaller companies, typically it's to reduce the number of compounds they have to make, and as well the time until they come up with good results.
Like fail fast, right? So they de-risk the whole process, leveraging external data.
Fail fast and get an assessment of likelihood for later stage. So for example, what we see is that lots of clinical trials phase in phase 3, right? And so you do have you've tested risk, and the drug is safe, and nevertheless it's not, the efficacy is not there. And so via accessing data of existing clinical trials, for example, you can gain information at a very early stage, whether in the end your compound might be successful. So you're not even testing that failure, but you're just deriving, let's say, probability distributions on how and why can I be successful at a later stage.
Yeah. And do you have any use cases where companies come to you to access real world data? Or if they're working on some cancer drug, they want to see how their competitor's drug performed in the real world. So do you have such examples as well?
None in production. We do look at this example of vertically distributed data that is based on real world evidence data, right? Data in a lab, data in the hospital, but that's basically for finding relations, of finding biomarkers and improving companion diagnostics, or for those type of use cases. Let's say drug discovery type of use cases, we have not in production the combination of, let's say, real world evidence data coupled and fusing into computational drug discovery approaches, but I would totally believe this is a very valuable use case, and we see as well the market opening up in the US more quickly than in Europe. So the usage of real world evidence data in the US is far more advanced than on the European side.
Right. You mentioned you generally protect the data, make sure there's no threat to IP. What about personal data, PI data? Like if you have patients' data, how do you generally protect that patient's identity? And how do you make sure you protect everything about the patient and related information?
Yeah,
which can be sensitive.
That's a wonderful question, and I think as well a good question to think about: how can I analyze data across jurisdictions? So typically, when I explained the privacy approach, I said that out of the output of the computations that you send back to a data scientist, you can not reconstruct individual data points. And so it's this, what our privacy approach, what it does is it prevents that out of an output of a computation, you can re-identify individual data points. That's what it brings apart, and that it brings that into the analytics request itself. So that means if a company sits on healthcare data, PII, then they typically have rights to use it, right? So that's on their side. And so what we do is we make sure that when you run a model on top of that data, that out of this trained model, and as well if it's multiple models, you can never reconstruct individual data points, meaning individual patients. Now, when you think about regulatory, let's say, regular systems across jurisdictions, typically you fall into regulation when you have this, there is something that how you can re-identify an individual, right? If I have a statistical result that says healthy humans eat more apples, right? That's a statistical information. That's not PII. But if I say guru eats apples, that's PII. Right. And so what if I can construct a system where I only learn on top of those healthy people eat apples, on top of this type of information, so on top of statistical information, but I can never reconstruct that guru was eating apples, then I have a good system to as well learn that across jurisdictions, because I don't fall into regulatory schemes. And so that's such technology can be quite well used to analyze data, clinical data, healthcare data across different countries, because you every time do not fall under the regulatory scheme.
Yeah, when you were saying Guru eats apple, I was like, Guru doesn't eat apple. But yeah. What about HIPAA compliance and everything is protected?
Yeah, so HIPAA compliance. So you're talking to someone that let's say has spent quite some energy into, let's say, advocating certain privacy methodologies. And I can't talk well about HIPAA, to be honest, because HIPAA allows you to. There's this safe harbor method. That means you have a data set that is, if you think about PAI, how it's constructed, or let's say captured today, it's often thousands of data points. And so what HIPAA says is if you cross out 16 key information, right, where you live, your name, some key information, if you cross that out, then that's considered as anonymized data. You can start, let's say, sharing that other data. That's from a privacy perspective horrible, because this anonymized data is still attackable and re-identifiable, because we live in a world where there's just an abundance of information, and I can go scrape the internet, go on LinkedIn, look at Twitter, and see where you've been, at what time, what you liked, and start to re-identify. And that's why, HIPAA regulation we don't consider as really protective for patients. Luckily, that's in Europe for GDPR. That's not the case. So we've been more successful in pushing this for GDPR cases, because obviously companies, they understandably do what they can do, and it's quite easy to anonymize data based on HIPAA. You just cross out some information and off you go. But I think from a perspective of how do we want to treat patients, how do we want to make sure that privacy of those patients is preserved, I think HIPAA is horrible. Yeah.
Very cool. There, and when the more you talk, more I'm thinking about the possible use cases. Like I started thinking about people where they have like wearable devices, they are generating data, and there are some companies, blockchain-based companies. What they do is they collect patient data or even healthy folks' data, and then whenever pharma needs it, they help with the matchmaking. So, like, do you really need blockchain to enable that, to protect the identity, to decentralize the whole process?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously, I do see, let's say, the value in some blockchain applications in terms of, let's say, a transaction auditability, right? It's just a system that is difficult, or some people would say impossible to fool. And I think it really depends on the construction of how do you log information, and as well, because there are definitely systems where you can store in a secure and locked down environment, and as well log every information. And as long as you don't, let's say, mistrust, I don't know, the cloud provider, that he specifically goes into that exact record and changes that information, that's basically as secure as blockchain solutions. But I mean, I don't want to advocate against blockchain. In the end, we do what it takes to get the solution working, and we have never run across a problem where we saw that blockchain is actually helping more than where it creates, let's say, complexity and costs. That's why we haven't leveraged it. But I think in the end, to me, it's fundamentally important to think about how can I solve a problem that is out there, and which technologies do I need to leverage?
Yeah, most of the time I see blockchain company. I generally think, do we really need blockchain for that? I mean, in theory, it sounds all good. I mean, the smart contracting piece, the immutable piece, like you cannot change it. But sometimes blockchain is just an overkill for most of the applications. I have no doubt about the potential of the technology, but for smaller use cases, sometimes you probably don't need it. Maybe in the future, once you have, let's say, a marketplace element, millions of data owners, millions of data buyers, and then you want to automate all of that in a secure way, then maybe it will make sense to make it more decentralized rather than making like a controlled marketplace and storing everything in AWS.
I would agree to that. I think it's as well a question of, let's say, how much infrastructure have we built?
Right.
And so, I mean, I'm as well a believer in that technology will change over time. And so building blocks have to be transformed. And obviously, blockchain is as well a possibility to decentralize and as well enhance privacy. So I think that's a good thing. But to really make it usable, there's definitely lots of infrastructure and key components that have to be built.
So you are in the business of data. you're protecting it, but how do you price data? I always think about it. Is it based on the potential impact? Is it based on the cost of producing that specific data? Like sequencing data, it's super cheap these days, right? I mean, at least it's cheap to generate that data. But how do you price different type of data? Like, do you have any regulation internally? You say, hey, if you have animal data, starting point is, I don't know, 20 cents or 30 cents per data point, or how do you do that? Because it sounds like a new interesting challenge to have.
Yeah, it's an incredibly big challenge. And I think as well, if it's one of the questions is how much value do I generate in such a system? And that's a difficult question. In our solution, we don't have such a pricing scheme. I think we have to create more data points to start doing that. And as well, it's not just about the type of data, but obviously as well about the size, the quality, and then as well about the ability to combine it, right? If you, again, this example of genomics versus healthcare data, both data sets alone should be priced very differently than in a collaborative setup. And so what we think of is how can we empower the participants, our clients and partners, to generate the biggest value and somehow price it according to the value being generated. It's a new market evolving. And so in that sense, there are too little proof points and no one knows how to assess the risk, how to price such models. And that's why as well, our business model is not evolved to an extent where I could say, okay, that's the metric that I'm optimizing for. I'm not there, or we are not there yet.
Yeah, it sounds like we need some regulation based on these 5 things. You price the data. And one thing you mentioned really got my attention is how do you combine that data? I see this all the time. Companies acquire smaller companies, but they don't know how to really merge their data. Even when the mergers happen, they don't necessarily use the data of company they merge with or acquire because they struggle how to structure with it. If you acquire a company or if you partner up with someone and you don't know how to really combine their data and your data, you're basically losing quite a bit value.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think, it's a typically question of what type of data model can you build. And as well, that's a inherently complex and not just complicated problem because data is fluid in that sense. And the model that you build obviously needs to capture, let's say, this knowledge that is hidden within such data sets. And so, what we invest quite some time into when we, let's say, set up such agreements or partnerships is what type, let's say, abstractions of that data can I build that are, let's say, interoperable and can start combining such data sets. So where pretty much they fit to each other. And that's where we invest into, because for us, obviously, our value is higher when we make the data that is coupled to our platform is higher. And so we are willing to kind of like go deep here. But I think that's an inherent problem of data science and not just of, let's say, our model of federated data science.
Right. It's really exciting what you're doing because there's no limit when you think in terms of impact. Everyone needs data. Everyone needs high quality data. Everyone produces data too. So there's no limit where you can add value. So I do want to go back to your own entrepreneurial journey. I know you are a serial entrepreneur. You started a couple of other projects, companies before. But in your current role, what challenges you face? What keeps you up at night? I'm asking this so some wannabe entrepreneur understands the challenges because from outside it looks very glamorous.
Yeah.
The CEO of cool AI company, but I started my own company recently, so I'm also aware of some challenges. I would love to hear from your words. What are the common challenges an entrepreneur face, especially in the early stages?
Yeah, I think at a very early start, it's, I think, really finding the problem that you're solving, identifying it, making sure that you have a solution that where companies are willing to pay, and as well you can show that this is a unique solution. So let's say just the innovative part of it that then fits to someone is willing to pay. You have this ability to sell it. I think that's a big challenge at the beginning. No, this is not our, let's say, biggest challenge at the moment. I think we've passed that phase and are currently in that mode where we, let's say, have a large enough company that it's not just the a core team that suddenly where everyone knows what we are doing, and we are quite flexible in moving and shifting around and jumping on kind of like new requirements, but rather we need to identify the right direction as well, teach everyone and educate everyone on what we've been doing and why we are doing what we are doing. And by why, I don't mean just the mission, but rather like the individual things. How do we build out our product? How do we build our customer relations? And in particular, the more, let's say, complex your underlying topic and product is, the more upfront costs you have when new people join. And so, yeah, our current challenge is really bringing the different, we have quite an interdisciplinary team, very good scientists, researchers, engineers, so top-notch talent, but bringing together and making them collaborate is not an easy task. Not because, let's say, there's no willingness, but rather because I'm just making sure that information is there, and as well, you as a founder communicate that and don't get lost in kind of like all the quick things that you learn and where you adapt. Your organization obviously needs to adapt to that as well and understand that journey. And so I'm practicing a lot on communication, clear communication, simple communication, setting targets, and as well sticking to that. So that's one of the difficulties that we face at the moment. And I think there's more to come, right? If you scale from, I don't know, 20 to 100 people, I don't even know, right? I'm excited to learn it. I think that's as well what I would say, like entrepreneurship, if you have the willingness to learn quickly and continuously, that's the right path. But if you get stressed by that, living in that uncertainty, I would not recommend, because it's now doing this since more than 3 years. And I'm continuously thinking, okay, if I have this, then my core problem is solved. And then once I have it, I realize, okay, there's just so much more unsolved things. It just has become way more uncertain. There's more interest in that company. You have to balance more interests. So it's getting more and more complex. And I think as well from a, let's say, personal perspective, I think one really has to practice as well, lowering the stress, the emotional stress that you feel by that uncertainty. And to me, it feels that it's getting bigger over time. And you have to love it. So if that's kind of like what you, where you're driven by, I think entrepreneurship is the most fulfilling thing.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a couple of things, and I do agree. Clarity of thought and clearly able to communicate that is very important, because if you don't know where you want to go, as a leader, it's challenging to align the rest of the team. Other thing is, most people don't talk about is more like a stress piece, how to really maintain your mental hygiene, for the lack of better term. So, I mean, it's this continuous challenges, struggle, it's never ending. Unlike when you do a job, let's say you work for a big company, for first few weeks, it takes time to adjust, but then you know what you are doing, you just keep doing same thing and you're good. But when you start your own company, it's just unexpected, continuous challenges. You are doing that. But I think as an entrepreneur, you really grow professionally and personally. You really learn how to handle stress and be uncomfortable all the time. You're never comfortable, right?
And have that sense of urgency at any given point in time. That's so very important.
I love that. So what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneur, if you have to give one or two advice based on your experience?
Think big. That's my biggest advice. I think it's the key driver to access to capital. And I think the key driver that as well inspires other people to join you and follow that, let's say, mission. So I think if you can paint a picture of where you want to be, and that sounds crazy maybe to your friends, but does not sound crazy to people that as well think alike, I think this is critical as well. Then if you think of access to capital, obviously that's that's important as well, and that would be my biggest advice.
I agree more. I mean, as an entrepreneur, you have to be a dreamer. But Robin, it's really it was fun to talk to you. I really enjoyed listening about your company, your personal journey. I really believe there's a huge potential of what you're doing, and you already have a great start. I'm a strong believer what you're doing has a great impact, and it can potentially revolutionize not just biotech industry, but also healthcare and other related industry. So it was a pleasure talking to you. Let's stay in touch.
Thanks so much, Guru. It was my pleasure as well.